all for coming. It's really a pleasure to see your faces and to have some time together. To focus on the subject of compassion. I think maybe it's something that could use some more airtime in our society, so let's give it some. Yeah, Suzanne was just saying about being in this room, and it kind of always makes me look up. About 20 years ago, I refinished these beams up here that you're looking at. And so it's good to be here in a place that is so beautiful. I'm really grateful to the Willits Art Center for letting us be here tonight too. I want to start in kind of a traditional way, which is close to my heart and dear, which is to ask your permission to speak, especially to my elders. Many of you here are certainly my elders. We were taught in our traditional ways to always try to be still and be quiet and pay attention to our elders and try to learn something. And so I have to ask your permission. May I please speak first? And excuse me for going first. Thank you. And secondly, to the mothers in the room particularly, the topic of compassion and family communication, I think, is so traditionally maybe thrust, but definitely falls on the shoulders of the mothers who know very well what it takes to bring life into this world. And so to you, I humbly ask, may I speak first? And I will allow time for you at the end. We were also taught that it's the men's job to listen. It's the men's job to be able to make a prayer for our family. And in order to do that, we have to be paying attention. We have to know what's going on and what the circumstances of life mean to those that we care about. So I'm going to talk more about that. And I just wanted to point to that because that's what I was taught. It's the men's job to listen to their family and to pray and to do whatever they can to help sustain that life. The other thing I was taught is the importance of starting with stillness. And I'm going to just relax this microphone and take 10 breaths, and maybe you might join me. And we could all just settle whatever we stepped away from to be here, settle into our seats, settle into our spines, settle into our breaths. Each breath, feel your feet on the floor and your butt in the chair, your arms as they rest. Maybe open up a little extra space for your belly to breathe. Maybe open up a little extra space for your heart to connect. Maybe keep your eyes open if that works for you, so that you remember that you're here with others. And we try to gain the practice of settling right where we are. One question in settling is to notice your mood, to notice your quality of mind, and to notice what energies or tensions are in the body. Might be painful. Some of us suffer from different things, so you can just bring some attention to it. Hold it lightly. So I had a whole self-introduction page, which I'm just boldly going to skip over, and maybe some of it will come into play. So kind of the main thing that I want to talk about tonight in terms of compassion is the idea of practice. The idea that this is something that we don't get right, that we are approaching, that we're going towards. And that no matter how much experience we have, no matter how smart we are, no matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we pound our heads against the wall, we still have to practice. There's a concept that I really like to think about, people being fit into boxes. There's, the concept of the man box or the woman box or the elder box or the, person of this skin color, person of this type or that type, person of this sexual orientation, whatever it might be. There's these boxes that society always tries to fit us into. And by doing so, kind of crushes our ability to express our humanness. And so mostly practice is kind of getting out of these boxes that we've been jammed into, these ways that we've been misshaped, and trying to regain our natural shape, our natural way of moving and being and expressing in the world. This idea of practice, I'm going to kind of break it down into a few different things and talk about them as I go. I was practicing for this talk before I came down here, and it ran over considerably, so I had to cut a bunch of things out. So I had a nice quote for you, but I will paraphrase it in summing up and saying that this is a quote from one of my teachers, Norman Fisher. He said, "If you want to learn about suffering, try loving. And conversely, if you want to learn something about love, you're going to have to understand suffering." The first step of practice, these are big words that'll take a minute to write. Confession. What I mean by confession is the act of just acknowledging what's happening. Just kind of the bare bones, like being with the difficulty of the moment. Like the quote that I just said, love is going to involve suffering. More of that quote, it's coming back to me, is no matter what happens, all of our love will end in loss. Not most of the time, not some of the time, but 100% of the time. Ultimately, if not by death, then by some other form of loss. So loving has built into it inherent suffering and difficulty. So this first thing is confession. This is difficult. Ouch, this hurts. Which is so hard for so many of us to say. Ouch, this hurts. It's so much easier to just get angry and not feel the pain. And that's something that I'm going to keep coming back to, is the destructive quality of anger. On the one hand, the need for there to be safe places for anger, because anger exists. It's a really huge part of our human experience. But that when brought into loving relationships, it only destroys. It only damages. It only sets back. It only confuses. It only complicates. And yet it happens. And so this act of confession, this is difficult. This hurts. There's grief. One of my teachers, Martine Prechtel, talks extensively about grief as basically the path of a spiritual person is the path of expressing grief, going to that place and grieving. The next thing is repentance. And like, again, these are big words. In the traditions that I came up in, Native American prayer traditions and the Zen traditions, this is a really huge thing. It's kind of like the beginning. You can't really get very far without getting to that place of asking for mercy. In our Native American prayer, always the first line is, I have difficulty, please have mercy. I have difficulty, please have mercy. I have difficulty, please have mercy. Repeated. In our Zen tradition, the act of beginning your life of practice is to take refuge, to find a safe place. Though the rains and the winds and the storms of life have got us wherever we are, there's some faith, there's some place, there's something that we can take refuge in. And that's what I mean by repentance. And maybe in a really simple form in relationships, on a real basic level, this is the act of apologizing, which doesn't come so easy to those of us that have egos. Apologizing. Norman Fisher, who I quoted earlier, is a man that I look to with great respect, and his ability to apologize is kind of like rain falling from the sky. It's just like anything and everything. Oh, I must have made another mistake. I apologize. And for so long for myself, I was taught, like, never apologize. And being a Scorpio is definitely my nature. There is no apology. But this act of repentance, this act of apologizing, is so pivotal for any kind of communication, any kind of relationship to be able to go forward. There has been harm. I didn't mean it. That wasn't what I meant. Please accept my apology. This is what I meant. And so then that brings us to the next thing. Vow. Like, I think I could say that practice is vow. Practice is returning to intention over and over and over again. So this idea of having a compassionate communication, having compassionate relationships, to me is about practicing vow, returning to intention. Because we are human, we make mistakes. Because we are human, we have a limited view. We misunderstand. We don't get the whole picture all the time. All the time. You know, it's like we're not infinitely perceptive. We can't possibly know the consequences to our actions, to our words, no matter how smart we think that we are, no matter how sensitive or perceptive we think we are. So this idea of returning to intention over and over again. And then also the thing about vow is a very powerful word. You notice it's a more powerful word than intention. It carries the weight of commitment. And it carries the weight of choice. Relationships that aren't based in choice are just going to involve a tremendous amount of suffering. They're basically just repeating trauma. Trauma causes a lack of choice. Healing from trauma is getting back into choice. And so vow carries with it that quality of choice. Not only is this my intention, but in spite of the difficulty, I'm still choosing it. And that's the commitment. That's the commitment part, is like quitting isn't an option. And then this also brings a part that we talk about in somatic coaching, that is, what do you stand for, is a question we often ask. This idea of a stand, something that you're willing to stand for, something you're willing to put your energy behind, devote your life to, something you're willing to put yourself on the line, something you're willing to die for, something that if it hasn't accomplished by the time of your death, you gave it all you had. And you hope somebody else is going to pick up the torch and keep going. That's a stand, you know. A stand is what you will be remembered for. You won't be remembered for, oh, he's the guy that paid the mortgage. I doubt that. You might be remembered for, he really stood for community safety. He really stood for family connection. He really stood for justice. He really stood for whatever it is that you're a stand for, that is your vow. He's a stand for kindness. So that's so important in practice, to have that as like what you come back to, where you are, who you are. I would say in my searches, what I found to answer the question of who am I, which has been a great search for me, the closest I can come to answering that is it's what am I committed to? I am a commitment to blank. That's the closest I can come to truly identifying myself. The next thing is presence. We started with a minute of silence. Presence is about returning to this, no matter what it is. Returning to this. What is right here? And that can be really uncomfortable. That can be totally full of ecstasy and joy. And sometimes we can't even tolerate the level of joy. That could be confusing. That could be a pain in your back. It could be the feeling of connection with someone. But returning to this, right here, this idea of returning, I think it's the nature of mind to stick. We investigate mind. We find that mind always sticks onto things, and you'll have a thought, and all of a sudden you'll notice you're about 10 years down the road planning out something, stuck on that train, stuck on that thought. So the practice is returning, getting off the train and returning to the station, getting off the train and returning to the station, here, over and over and over and over. If not with every breath, at least once a day. I recommend it. A teacher of mine once said, a quote I like to remember very much, "A good thing is worth repeating." Stick to the basics, returning to what's happening. And this can be extremely, extremely difficult. It can require partnership. It can require someone to hold your hand, hold your shoulder, someone to lean on. In the trenches of life, in the trenches of a life of practicing compassion, it's not easy to be present. Most of society is focused on getting us to not be present. That's the main thrust of society as I observe it. Whether it's television, entertainment, alcohol and drugs, shopping, buying, everything. The main thrust is to take us away from what is present. And so this idea of returning to present is a big deal. Just stopping. That's why I started with it. It's a big deal. So the next thing is morality, which is kind of, again, a kind of big word that might have a lot of feelings about. But my teachers have taught us that you can't actually be present until you're living an ethical life. Your consciousness will not let you settle. So morality becomes a really big deal. I mentioned about the idea of practice is one of that we get it wrong over and over again, and we keep going towards it. We keep going, approaching our intentions, approaching our vows, approaching our beloved, approaching the divine, and never actually getting there. It's an interesting concept, right? To eternally approach your beloved and never actually get there. But it's actually the two hands touching that makes contact. It's not actually integration that we actually know each other. It's through the moment of contact. So this idea of morality, and this usually is described as a list of don'ts. I protested against that for a long time in my life. It was like it felt difficult. Felt difficult. So I always like to revert things in the positive form. So like if it says don't kill, I always want to say protect life. So there's value in both. I want to just lay out here a list of things. There's this idea that like maybe if everything's practice and it doesn't matter if you get it wrong, then can't I just do whatever I want? That's maybe one side. And the other side is that no, actually it really matters. Like we're talking about having relationships with real people who get their feelings hurt, and we're talking about living beings that get hurt. We're talking about a life that we're living, taking care of our own life, and that we're mortal and we're fragile. So it's actually, there are things that are not okay. And even if we have the sense of practice that we can return to vow, return to our intention, it's important to be clear that there are things that are not okay. Not killing, not stealing, not lying, not misusing sexuality, not putting yourself before others, not causing intoxication of the mind, not holding on to ill will or being angry at others, and not being stingy or possessive. Those are big ones right there. And if those aren't present in a relationship, there's just going to be harm and harm and harm and harm and harm. And there is going to be harm and harm and harm and harm. So that brings us right to the next thing, which is one teacher of mine described life as one continuous mistake. Practice. If you're not practicing, I don't know, do whatever you want. But if you're going to practice compassion and kindness, you're going to find that your life is one continuous mistake. So failure becomes really important. It becomes the compost that we are able to sprout seeds in and grow flowers and grow fruit and grow food to feed to our beloved, to feed to our families and communities, to feed to the holy. There's this idea in our society out there that that it's a shame, that you should be shamed if you fail. If you fall down, shame on you. And this is terrible. This is terrible, I have to say. This is a shame. So this is my point I want to make. The difference between shame on you and something being a shame. It's a shame that we hurt each other. But to shame somebody for causing harm just causes more harm. This is the idea of practice that I want to come back to again. In the life of practice, there isn't room for shame. There's just everything I just talked about. Confession, repentance, vow, presence, morality. Oh, I made another mistake. Let me get back on track. Let me stop. Come back to this place. Remember my vow. And move forward. For the sake of life, for the sake of respect, truth, clarity, equality, forgiveness, and generosity. I think generosity is perhaps the best measure for whether or not we're on track or off track. In anything that we do, if we can ask ourselves, is this generous? I was driving down here. I was a little bit late. I got to the stop sign. There was a car coming. I knew I could get out in front of them. So I did. And immediately I was like, that was really not generous of me. That person had to put on their brakes. Yeah, I accelerated fast and I got in front of them, but it was not generous of me. So I think generosity is just a terrific measure, always. Are we being generous? How can we be more generous? So often in my life, when I experience something really beautiful from someone, what's beautiful about it is the generosity. Is that they thought of what was important to somebody else and they reached out towards that. And that act of generosity is just such a beautiful thing. So the final thing after failure in a life of practice is one that younger people don't have the life experience to figure out yet. I'm not spelling it right, probably. Patience, of course, is the antidote to anger. Patience is, what do they say, that saying, youth is wasted on the young, I think. I am so grateful in my life to be in contact with elders because I think it's the source of patience. And as I mentioned in the beginning, mothers certainly have much experience with patience. So often in my parenting and my family, I just get to a line and it's just like, I don't have any more patience. And then I'll see my wife go and just go even way further. And I'm just blown away, wow, where did that patience come from? It's just amazing. I don't know how to cultivate patience other than stopping and being with myself. Part of my personal story is my second child died on the day he was born. And so the healing process for me for that was I had to learn to be patient with myself. I had to invest time every single day in being still and asking myself, how are you? What is it now? And just listening. Hours every day listening to myself. And that kind of is what builds patience in my experience, is just time. Just time spent being present. I'm going to jump into communication. So I'm going to just break down what I am thinking about in terms of communication. 3 parts. I really don't see communication possible without stopping. Both physically, to be present with another human being, and maybe more importantly, mentally. All of the stories, the records that keep playing, all of the if-onlys, all of the I am this, I am that, I am not that, you are this, you are that. One teacher of mine said, in order to listen to somebody, he had to keep repeating to himself, you are not what I think you are. You are not what I think you are. You are not what I think you are. Because, of course, this human being is beyond what we can think, what we can imagine about them. So stopping is so difficult for us to just make space, to really listen, to really look, to feel, and to receive. Communication just doesn't have a ground to sprout out of until there's that. One of my training grounds is in Aikido, and we always start class first with just sitting still, just stopping and breathing. And it's a profound practice to stop. It's just not, again, not what you see revved up out there in our society. There's no time for stopping. There's no time for reflection. And in fact, when it comes to somatic coaching, one thing we talk about is the importance of getting to the end of something and allowing there to be an open space. Because until you actually stop and allow there to be an open space, you're actually just continuing the same thing you were doing. There's nothing new happening. There's no space for initiation, for the spark of something wonderful to come in. And that's what a conversation is supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be a spark of something wonderful. So stopping, listening, looking, feeling, receiving. The thing that stopping does also that I want to say is it creates some dignity. And in our somatic coaching, we have kind of 3 realms that we sort of recognize as what all human beings are going for, or something. It's sort of like the water, air, and earth of being a human is dignity, connection, and purpose. Stopping is the dignity part, just having some dignity. The next part is to hear. This is the act of curiosity. What is it? That's the part that makes it a conversation. That's the part that makes it more than just one person having a monologue going on and on, like I'm doing right now. And I'm hoping that you all do have a sense of curiosity by showing up here. And in a conversation, this thing of finding out, what is it? Is it that? Oh no, it's not that. Is it that? Is it like this? What is it? Sometimes it's a powerful thing just to ask somebody, what do you want? And listen for a minute, and then say it again. What do you want? And then listen for a minute, and then say it again. And see how deep the conversation goes. So this element of curiosity can lead to something more powerful than we could come up with in our own minds by helping each other discover the meaning of what's happening in our life. And I think that's sort of the key thing about hearing, is discovering meaning. What does this mean to you? Like, it's one thing to say, I lost my job. Oh, it sounds like you lost your job. But what does that mean to you? You know, what's at stake here? What do you stand to lose with what you're talking about? What do you stand to gain? What does it mean on all sorts of different levels? And trying to discover meaning with each other, I think, is really the place where we connect. And like I said before, how sometimes being present can involve somebody, a partner, somebody to hold your hand or hold your shoulders, rest your head on. I think discovering meaning in our life is really wonderfully benefited with communication, with partnership and sharing. I have spent a lot of time alone and by myself and found meaning myself, but it's like I could spend 10 years doing that, and I could have a 10-minute conversation with someone and go to the same place. So it's like magnitude, that we can give each other by helping each other discover what's at stake for you here. What does this mean to you? So then the third part is the other side of that, to say. One of my teachers, Howard Lagarde, introduced this concept of saying as not a verb, but more of a noun of something, saying. And he described it, he encouraged us to be a human being such that the trees will lean in towards you to listen to what you have to say. I really like that image myself. So much of what we say is idle speech, is either hurtful or destructive or just not very helpful. And that's a practice. And we have to be really patient and gentle with ourselves to try to say something that is encouraging, that is appreciative, and that acknowledges the qualities of the person. It's really easy to get stuck on the what is happening and totally not see the qualities of the human being, the qualities of the situation. It may be a business relationship you're talking about, it doesn't matter. It may be anything, but the qualities, you are brave. When was the last time somebody said that to you? You are creative and intelligent. You've got this. You can figure this out, This quality of acknowledging what somebody has and encouraging them. That's saying something that encourages the human being to bloom. One of my teachers, I really appreciated this quote. For a long time, I explored the question of what is compassion? What is compassion? And I think there's a tendency to look at beautiful things and want to go towards that. And like the other quote that I started with, he points to the idea that compassion is not something outside of suffering or difficulty, but actually compassion is seeing beauty on account of the difficulty. So it's actually by looking at the suffering that we find beauty, that we live in compassion. And again, that's the difficulty. It's hard to focus on suffering. It's hard to focus on the part that's uncomfortable. But that's where beauty is. That's where compassion is. Any great work of art or writing, of theater, of music is showing us the difficulty of the human experience and turning it in such a way that we see the beauty there, right next to it. So that's the part of saying something that finds the beauty right in the difficulty. So that's just some thoughts I wanted to throw out there. Those two things about practice, about communication. And I do want to open up the floor. Let's Can we do something together before we go to that? I would like to invite anybody who wants to stand. So as we did in the beginning, find your feet on the floor, maybe about the distance of your shoulders apart, maybe pointing straight ahead, which is an interesting thing in itself, where our feet point, our energy goes off in that way. So maybe if we could point our feet straight ahead, our energy might go where we intend it to go. So knees are soft, hips are soft. Notice any tension in the low back. If there is, maybe wiggle it around. Just kind of move with it a little bit. Find a soft place. Let the belly be soft. Let the shoulders roll up and back. Let the eyes be soft, downcast in front of you. Let the chest roll open. Let there be space between your elbows and your ribs. Let your hands be extended and relaxed. Notice whether there's tension in your forehead and your eyes, your jaw. I've been taught to rotate my jaw forward a little bit because I tend to hold it back. I always remember to stick it out a little bit. So having brought some awareness to your body, just come into your full length between the earth and the heavens above, cosmos. I mentioned this realm of your dignity, standing upright, occupying the space that you occupy between earth and heaven. This is your length. Nobody else gets to take up this space. And next, feel that you have a left side and a right side. You have ears that hear sound. You have eyes that take in light. Feel your width from left to right. Notice there's others in the room with you. Your width is the realm of connection. When we don't feel safe, our width is contracted. When we do feel safe, we reach out. Next, notice that you have a back. Even though you never get to see it, it's always there. Everything that's behind you, right? That holds you up, that supports you. Those whose shoulders you stand on. All the life experience that came before you. Backs of your legs, your buttocks, your small back, upper back and neck. And notice that you have a front. As much as we might try to pretend otherwise, we're actually very vulnerable creatures. We're actually the only creature on earth that exposes our soft parts. Everyone else keeps down towards the ground, but we stand up, expose our eyes, our mouth, our throat, our heart, our breath, our innards, genitals, knees. Ask anybody that's worked a little and they'll tell you knees are very vulnerable. So notice that you have a front and a back. This is your depth. Behind you, like I said, all that has been. In front of you, potential and your purpose. Somewhere in the middle of all three of these, length, width, and depth, is your center. I might suggest this is where your breath originates. This is what matters most to you. This is your organizing principle. So check in with yourself right now. Maybe just ask yourself, what is most important? What is my organizing principle? Maybe it's as simple as the next breath, just to go on living. Just to be alive is enough. Maybe there's a vow there, intention. So thank you. That's standing, centering, and with that knowledge, maybe we could ask any questions. If you want to sit down again, you're welcome. Boundaries. The question is, what about boundaries? So, right, this is the whole thing about morality, ethical conduct. That's why that's so much an important part of practice. Like I said, my teachers have pointed out that you actually can't settle when you're living unethically, when you're disrespecting boundaries, engaging in inappropriate sexual behavior, putting yourself in first in traffic or in marriage or in parenting. Boundaries are huge. On the one hand, the idea of boundaries is itself what causes suffering. You know, the idea that we have a separate self that's somehow permanent and lasting is what causes suffering. So on the one hand, there's that truth. And then on the other hand, we can't get away from the fact that we are separate selves. And we have to take care of that. So this is left and right. Pull is itself what initiates practice. You know, we may have a vow of non-harming, but yet we turn around and disrespect somebody. And so this is this idea of something that we'll never achieve, that we intend to go on practicing throughout this lifetime and countless lifetimes to come without ever arriving at it. You know, respect is so elusive. I once asked a teacher, I said, I don't understand women. I want to understand women. She was like, lots of luck. Left it at that. And I was kind of anxious at the time and really wanted an answer. And I've come back to that years after years and just been like, yeah, it's hard. You can't pin it down, can you? You know, there's nothing to pin down. So boundaries are there, and yet we violate them constantly. You can't eat without killing. That's a pretty big boundary. We have a chef in the house. I have fasted many times for days, gone without food and water for 4 days, just to be to not have to deal with that for a little while, just to be intimate with myself, just to be close to God. And it's really helpful to not have to deal with that for a little while, but then you have to come back to your life and deal with it. So that's something about boundaries. One of the things that I mentioned is, in repentance is the idea of refuge, having a place, not necessarily a physical place, but just a place in your mind, place in your practice that's a refuge for you, that reminds you, as you said, encourages you. Like I talked about in conversation, the importance of encouraging each other, and the importance of, after 30 years of being a person engaged in ceremony continuously, I have found that I could sum it all up by saying, well, it's really helpful to be encouraged. That's sort of the point of ceremony, it's being encouraged. You know, we have wedding ceremonies or something, and I think we all know that feeling when we feel encouraged. You know, maybe in our own marriage, like, oh, that is a good idea. I should do that. So encouragement is really important, and that can come from those that we're doing it together with. So there's this idea of a community that we can remind each other, that we can just simply by our existence. Oh, I remember that person, and that reminds me of my practice. You know, I think it's can't be overestimated, the value of having a community in life, having, whether you call it a family, whether you call it a community, whether you call it a congregation or a sangha or whatever it is to you. It cannot be underestimated, the value of having that connection with other human beings that reminds us to come back. Because of the sticky nature of mind, we are constantly running off in tangents. And we need to come back. And so I just want to that's what comes up. It's just the value of sangha, the value of community, the value of being held by others. Yeah.
I really like what you said about the trees listening.
Yeah.
And being a good listener. But can you give me, not like an elevator speech, but just one word or two words of how I can be a better communicator?
Yeah, so there's this idea of being a good listener, right? I think that's kind of a trap, and there's a lot of difficulty in that in a relationship. But basically, I kind of laid that out, and to stop your own trip, to put yourself on hold. Sometimes it takes somebody just looking us in the eyes and just saying, stop. Be here with me right now. That's a really vulnerable place to be. And vulnerability is really difficult. But communication cannot begin without it. In fact, communication without it is just jamming more crap into a full container. And it makes a mess. The practice of stopping and finding out why it's so difficult for you to listen is something that has to be undertaken. Because there's answers to that question. What is there? What is it for you? Why is it hard for you to listen? Because it hurts. That's why. Because have you been listened to? Whatever the story is, whatever the reasons are, the pain is there, the grief is there. And we don't want to stop and be with grief. There's a lot of techniques out there for being a good listener. And I'm not about techniques. I think it's fine just to be yourself. I don't think you need to figure out how to be a better you. But you need to understand why it's so difficult for you to be still. And be with your own pain long enough to be able to be with somebody else's pain. That's compassion. The courage it takes to communicate. That's huge. I often feel like anybody that's willing to open their mouth, I just bow to them because it's just like, wow, that's really huge. It's scary, right? Are we going to be heard? Is there even space for us? Why would I bother communicating? And then the other thing is maybe I want to be loved. I like that idea. But can I really let myself be loved? Can I really let myself be loved? So the courage that it takes to speak is the courage that it takes to take up some space in this world. The standing practice that we just did, I talked about the space that you occupy between earth and heaven, the space that you occupy between others, between the past and present. That takes a lot of courage just to stand and be. There's so much shaming that happens in our shaping. I talked at the very beginning about the boxes that we've been shoved into. This is what it means to be a man. This is what it means to grow up. This is what it means to be a woman. This is what it means to be, long list. We've been shamed into this little, flat, straight, narrow thing. And the only sound that can come out of it is squeak. So to actually say something is like tremendous courage. So wouldn't we want to honor that by just being like, wow. Like, I don't need to lay anything else on top of it. It's just wow. And this brings us back to sometimes there's difficult things that are said. We don't want to hear them. They might be offensive. They might be demanding, manipulative, oppressive. So how does that land on you is up to you. How are you going to receive that? So in this practice of being aware of your left and your right and where your feet are pointing, if we in relationship and in conversation allow something to fall square on our shoulders, it's going to land heavy. If we do this, it's not about me all of a sudden. You can kind of be like, oh, here's this statement that's really difficult. Whoa! Did you see that? Is that what you meant? Did you? Instead of, So, yeah, there's two sides of that. There's the courage of speaking and there's the courage of receiving. So that's a great practice, just to be aware of your body and how things land on you. How things land on you. You can even extend and meet something before it's dumped on you, You could actually say, oh, I see you've had a hard day, So, I don't know, two sides to that. Does that help? Well, thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.